Trust me, you won't forget this one. A 3-year-old little girl. Tiny hands. Tired eyes. Standing in the corner of a mansion kitchen at 7 in the morning. Holding a mop bigger than herself. Not because she wanted to play. Because a 29-year-old woman, a woman who was supposed to become the lady of that house, told her to. Toddler. And everything in that house was perfectly normal. Until the billionaire walked through that door. What happened in the next 60 seconds changed every single life in that room forever. Welcome back, beautiful people. If this is your first time here, we are so glad you found us. This channel is your home for real emotional stories that will move your heart, shift your perspective, and remind you that humanity still has goodness left in it. Before we begin today's story, drop a comment and tell me, where in the world are you watching from right now? I genuinely love reading every single one of your responses. Now, what you are about to hear today is one of those stories that starts in silence and ends in tears, the good kind. It is a story about power, cruelty, innocence, and one moment that exposed everything hiding beneath a beautiful surface. Stay with me. Every second of this one matters. Sometimes the most dangerous people wear the prettiest smiles. Her name was Vivian Cole, and she was, by every surface-level standard, the perfect woman. 29 years old. Slender and polished. The kind of woman who walked into a room and made other women straighten their posture. She had sharp cheekbones, a practiced laugh, and an Instagram feed that looked like it was curated by an art director. She wore cream-colored blazers to brunch and called it casual. She knew the right people, attended the right events, and said all the right things at exactly the right moments. And she was engaged to Nathaniel Brooks. Nathaniel was 32. Self-made billionaire. Real estate and tech. He had started with nothing, literally nothing, raised in a single-parent household in Columbus, Ohio, by a mother who cleaned hotel rooms 6 days a week. He had clawed his way out through scholarships, sleepless nights, and a level of discipline that most people only read about in motivational books. He was not soft, but he was good. That was the thing about Nathaniel that people who truly knew him always said first. Not that he was successful, not that he was handsome, but that he was genuinely, quietly, deeply good. He had met Vivian at a charity gala 2 years earlier. She had seemed kind that night. Generous, even. She had personally written a check for a children's literacy program and smiled for the cameras with what looked like real warmth. Nathaniel had been impressed. He was not easily impressed. They dated. She was charming. She was smart. She fit into his world effortlessly. And for a man who had spent most of his adult life building instead of living, having someone who made life feel easy was intoxicating. He proposed on a rooftop in Nashville on a Thursday evening in October. She cried. He thought they were happy tears. He was not wrong about her intelligence. He was wrong about her heart. The Brooks estate sat on 4 acres outside of Atlanta, Georgia. A white colonial mansion with black shutters, a circular driveway, and an oak tree in the front yard that was older than the house itself. Nathaniel had bought it 3 years ago, not because he needed the space, but because something about that oak tree reminded him of his grandmother's backyard. He was sentimental like that, quietly. The household staff was small and loyal. A groundskeeper named Mr. Abera who had been with Nathaniel since the beginning. A chef named Rosario who made Sunday breakfast feel like a religious experience. And a housekeeper named Dara. Dara was 26. Hardworking. Gentle-natured. She had come to Nathaniel's estate 18 months ago through a staffing agency, and within the first 2 weeks he had known she was a keeper. Not because she was fast or flawless, but because she was careful. She cared about things. She noticed when a surface wasn't quite clean. She remembered how Nathaniel liked his coffee without being told twice. What Nathaniel did not know at first was that Dara had a daughter. Her name was Maisie. 3 years old. Round brown eyes. A gap between her 2 front teeth. The kind of laugh that sounded like small bells. Maisie had come into Dara's life during one of its hardest chapters, A relationship that didn't survive, a father who disappeared before the first birthday, and a young woman who chose to keep going anyway because what other choice did love leave you? Dara had explained her situation honestly to the estate manager when she was hired. She lived in a small apartment 20 minutes away. But on certain days, when the babysitter cancelled, when the daycare closed early, when the world outside did what the world sometimes does, Maisie came to the estate with her. Nathaniel had been told. He had said simply, "That's fine. Kids are kids." Vivian had been told too. She had smiled and said, "Of course. How sweet." But here's the question I want to ask you right now. Have you ever met someone who said all the right things, but something deep in your gut told you the words weren't real? Because Dara had felt it from the very first day Vivian moved into that house. A coolness behind the smile. A particular way Vivian's eyes moved when she looked at Maisie. Not with warmth, not with irritation exactly, but with something colder. Something that felt like dismissal. Like the child was furniture. Like she simply did not count. Dara told herself she was imagining it. She needed this job. She had a daughter to feed and rent to pay and no safety net beneath her. So she kept her head down, did her work with excellence, and kept Maisie quiet and close and out of the way whenever Vivian was home. But the truth, as it always does, was already moving toward the surface. What happens behind closed doors always finds a way out into the light. The first incident happened on a Tuesday morning in March. Nathaniel was in New York for a 3-day business trip. Meetings, negotiations, the kind of week that required him to be in 3 places at once. He called Vivian every evening. She answered cheerfully, told him the house was lovely, asked about his meetings with what seemed like genuine interest. At the estate, the morning had begun like any other. Dara arrived at 6:30, Maisie on her hip, because the babysitter had a fever and the backup plan had fallen through. She had texted the estate manager the night before. Everything was approved. She set Maisie up in the small sitting room near the kitchen, a cozy corner with a soft blanket, 2 stuffed animals, and a children's tablet loaded with cartoons. Maisie was content. She was always content. She was that kind of child. Dara got to work. Floors, surfaces, laundry. She moved through the house efficiently, checking in on Maisie every 15 minutes like clockwork. Vivian came downstairs at 8. She was dressed already, put together, heels on, which was unusual for a morning with no plans. She walked into the kitchen, poured herself a coffee, and stood at the island for a long moment without speaking. Then she walked toward the sitting room. She stood in the doorway, looked at Maisie. Maisie looked up from her tablet and gave a small wave, the way toddlers do, instinctively friendly, instinctively trusting. Vivian did not wave back. She turned and found Dara in the hallway. Her voice, when she spoke, was calm, pleasant even. The way a sharp thing can look harmless until it cuts you. "Dara, I need the east hallway mopped again. The grout between the tiles looks dull." "Of course, Miss Cole. I'll get to it right after I finish the..." "Now, please." Dara nodded. She went to get the mop. When she came back through the kitchen, she noticed Vivian standing near the sitting room door again. Maisie had set down her tablet and was looking up at Vivian with those wide, trusting eyes. And Vivian said quietly, so quietly that Dara almost didn't catch it, "You shouldn't just sit there doing nothing. Pick up those toy wrappers on the floor." Maisie looked at the floor, then at Vivian. She was 3. She didn't fully understand. But she reached down, the way children do when an adult's tone tells them to, and began picking up small pieces of paper from the floor. Dara stopped moving. For a moment the world went very still. Her daughter, her 3-year-old daughter, was crouched on the floor of a billionaire's mansion, picking up trash, because a grown woman had told her to. Dara set the mop against the wall. She walked to the sitting room. She picked Maisie up, held her against her chest, and said in the most controlled voice she had ever used in her life, "Maisie doesn't do chores, Miss Cole. She's 3. Vivian looked at her for a long moment. Then she smiled, that careful, practiced smile, and said, "I was just keeping her busy. No harm done." And she walked away. No harm done. What would you have done in Dara's position? Would you have stayed silent? Or would you have spoken up, even knowing it might cost you everything? Dara stayed. 'Cause she had to. Because the rent was due in 11 days and her savings account had $340 in it, and Maisie needed new shoes. She stayed, and she kept her head down, and she told herself it was a one-time thing. It was not a one-time thing. Over the following 3 weeks, small things accumulated. Vivian asking Maisie to help carry a small bag from one room to another. Vivian telling Maisie to stop making noise when the child was simply humming to herself. Vivian walking past Maisie without acknowledgement, as though the child were a piece of furniture that happened to breathe. And once, when Dara was briefly in the laundry room and Maisie wandered into the main hall, Vivian had crouched down to the child's level and said, in a voice low and sweet and utterly chilling, "Little girls who don't belong here should stay invisible." Maisie had not understood the words, but she had understood the tone. She had started crying. Dara had heard it from the laundry room, had come running, had found her daughter with tears on her cheeks and Vivian already gone. Heels clicking up the staircase like nothing had happened. That night, after Maisie was asleep, Dara sat in her small apartment and stared at the ceiling and made a decision. She was going to tell Nathaniel. She didn't know when. She didn't know how. But she was going to tell him. Because Maisie deserved better. Because silence was its own kind of failure. Because somewhere beneath the fear and the financial pressure, Dara still believed that the truth had weight, that it mattered, even when the world tried to convince you otherwise. She just didn't know that the truth was about to reveal itself without her help. Sometimes God doesn't wait for you to gather your courage. He arranges the moment himself. Nathaniel came home 2 days early. The New York deal had closed faster than expected. A signature, a handshake, and suddenly his Thursday became a Tuesday. He texted his housekeeper, not Vivian. Habit. He told Rosario he'd be home for dinner. He did not tell Vivian because he wanted to surprise her. He had a small gift, a bracelet she had admired in a shop window 3 months ago, which he had quietly tracked down and ordered. He arrived at the estate at 10:47 in the morning. He came in through the side entrance, the one off the garage, the one the staff used, because it was closer to where he parked and because, despite everything he had built, Nathaniel was not a man who needed grand entrances in his own home. He heard it before he saw it. Small voice, high and uncertain, the sound of a child trying not to cry. And then Vivian's voice, low, controlled, sharp as wire, saying, "I said hold it still." Nathaniel moved toward the kitchen. He stopped in the doorway. Vivian was standing at the kitchen island, beautifully dressed as always, coffee in one hand. On the floor beside her, on her knees, 3-year-old Maisie, both tiny hands pressed flat against the base of the island cabinet, holding it as though bracing it. A cloth beneath her small fingers, her lip trembling. Vivian was saying, "Don't let it slide. Just stay there." Maisie was trembling. Not from effort, from confusion, from fear. The mop was propped against the wall behind them. Dara was not in the room. Nathaniel would later learn she had been sent to the 3rd floor to reorganize the linen closet, a task that had appeared from nowhere that morning. Nathaniel stood in that doorway for what felt like a long time but was probably 4 seconds. For seconds where every version of who Vivian had told him she was, charitable, warm, gracious, kind, rearranged itself in front of his eyes into something completely different. He had grown up watching his mother get worn down by people who thought they had the right to treat her as less than she was, just because of her job, her zip code, her station in life. He had spent his entire adult existence quietly, fiercely dedicated to the idea that dignity was not something you earned. It was something every human being arrived with. And here was the woman he had chosen to build his life with, pressing a 3-year-old child to the floor of his kitchen because the child's mother worked for him. He said her name. Just once. Quietly. Vivian. He turned. And for the first time in 2 years, Nathaniel watched Vivian Cole's composure crack. Not dramatically, not in a way that anyone else might have caught, but he knew her face. He had studied it across 100 dinners and 1,000 quiet evenings. He saw it. She recovered almost instantly. Nathaniel, you're home early. Pick her up, he said. What? Pick her up off the floor. The silence that followed was the longest silence that kitchen had ever held. Vivian looked at him, then at Maisie, then back at him. She laughed slightly, a sound designed to reframe the moment, make it smaller, make him feel like he was overreacting. Nathaniel, she was just helping, it was a little game. Vivian. His voice did not rise. It didn't need to. Pick her up. She didn't move. So Nathaniel crossed the kitchen himself, bent down, and lifted Maisie from the floor. The little girl, who had never met this tall man in the nice suit, wrapped her arms around his neck the way children do when they are scared and someone holds them like they matter. And Nathaniel Brooks, billionaire, stood in his own kitchen holding a trembling 3-year-old and felt something inside himself become completely, permanently clear. I need you to tell me in the comments. What do you think happened next? Do you think Vivian tried to explain her way out of it? Or do you think this was finally the moment everything fell apart? The truth doesn't need a speech. Sometimes it just needs one witness. Dara came downstairs 11 minutes later. She walked into the kitchen and stopped. Nathaniel was seated at the kitchen table, Maisie on his knee, drawing something on a notepad he'd found in his jacket pocket. A house, it looked like, with a big sun above it. Maisie had one of his pens in her small fist, and was concentrating with a particular seriousness that 3-year-olds bring to all important work. Vivian was not in the kitchen. Dara looked at the scene. Her heart did something complicated. Mr. Brooks, she said. I didn't know you were home. I came in the side, he said. He looked at her steadily. Dara. I need to talk to you. He asked her to sit down. And then he asked her, gently, directly, in the way of someone who actually wants to know the answer, what life had been like in this house over the past several weeks. Not demanding. Not leading. Just asking. Dara was quiet for a long moment. She looked at Maisie, who was still drawing suns. And then she told him. All of it. The mop. The trash on the floor. The stay invisible. The morning Maisie had cried and Vivian had simply walked away. She told it plainly, without drama, without embellishment, the way people tell stories that are true, with pauses, with looking at the table, with a kind of quiet exhaustion that comes from carrying something heavy alone for too long. Nathaniel listened. He did not interrupt. He did not make sounds of disbelief. He just listened, with the full weight of his attention, the way his mother had always told him a real man listens, like the person talking is the most important person in the room. When Dara finished, the kitchen was quiet except for Maisie's small humming. Nathaniel looked at his daughter for a moment, then corrected himself mentally. Dara's daughter. But something in that slip of thought told him something about how he already felt about this child who had fallen asleep trustingly against his arm. He thanked Dara. He told her she had done nothing wrong. He told her Maisie was safe. And then he went upstairs. He found Vivian in the master suite, already recomposed, already practicing the version of the conversation she planned to have. She had a whole architecture of explanation ready. It was misunderstood, she was just trying to be playful, Dara was oversensitive. He had arrived at a strange moment without context. Nathaniel stood in the doorway of his own bedroom and looked at her for a long moment. Then he said 6 words. I don't think we're a match. She stared at him. What? I've been watching us, he said quietly. I've been watching who you are when no one important is looking. And today I saw it clearly. He paused. You treated a 3-year-old child like she was beneath you. Baby Vivian. Not because the child had done anything wrong, but because her mother works for me. He shook his head slowly. And if that's how you see people, If that's where your kindness stops, then I made a mistake. Vivian's expression moved through several stages rapidly. Disbelief. Anger. Then, almost immediately, calculation. She tried tears. Real ones this time, or close enough. She talked about stress, about feeling insecure in his world, about acting out in ways she wasn't proud of. She said she would do better. She said she loved him. And Nathaniel, who was a fair man, listened to all of it. Then he said, I believe you might mean that. But I also know what I saw. And I know what I heard. And I know that Maisie will remember, even if she can't say it yet, that she was safe or unsafe in certain rooms. Children remember with their bodies even when they can't remember with words. He looked at his hands. My mother cleaned rooms her entire life. I will not share my life with someone who would have made her feel invisible. He asked her to have her things moved by the end of the week. He removed himself from the room before she could respond further. Not out of cruelty. Out of clarity. Would you have made the same decision he did? Or do you think he was too absolute, too final? Tell me in the comments. I want to know what you think. The ending of one chapter is always the beginning of another, if you're brave enough to turn the page. In the weeks that followed, the Brooks estate became something different. Quieter in some ways. Simpler. The performance of a certain kind of life, the charity appearances, the carefully curated image, the feeling that love was something you maintained like a public relations campaign. All of that fell away. What was left was the house itself. And the people in it. Nathaniel told Dara she was not going anywhere. He gave her a raise she hadn't asked for. He set up a proper space in the estate for Maisie on the days she needed to be there. A little corner room near the kitchen that Rosario helped paint a soft yellow, filled with books and soft blocks and the kind of small furniture that is exactly the right size for a 3-year-old who is discovering that the world is larger than anyone told her. He didn't do it out of guilt. He did it because it was right. Because his mother had spent 30 years in rooms where she was treated like she didn't exist, and he had promised himself, in the way that children who witnessed injustice quietly promise, that he would spend his life building different rooms. Maisie, being 3 and therefore the wisest possible kind of human, accepted all of this with complete naturalness. She learned that the tall man with the nice suits always had a pen she could borrow. She learned that Rosario kept a specific drawer of animal crackers and always offered her some at 10 in the morning. She learned the estate the way children learn things, through proximity, through safety, through the slow accumulation of moments that whispered you belong here. Nathaniel took longer to heal. He had loved Vivian, or a version of her. The version she had carefully constructed for his benefit, which is a particular kind of grief because you mourn someone who was never fully real. He gave himself that grief honestly. He didn't rush past it or perform recovery for anyone else's comfort. His mother flew down from Columbus for a weekend in May. She was 61 now, with silver in her hair and the specific dignity of a woman who had raised a good son with her own hands. She walked through the estate slowly, touching the walls, the furniture, the window frames. She didn't say much. Then she sat down at the kitchen table and Dara brought her coffee and Maisie climbed onto the chair beside her and showed her the drawing she'd been working on all week. A very earnest portrait of what appeared to be a dog wearing a hat, though it was genuinely difficult to tell. Nathaniel's mother laughed. Real full laugh. And she looked at her son across the table and she said, This is the right room. He understood her completely. 6 months later, on a slow Saturday morning in November, Nathaniel was sitting on the back porch of the estate with a cup of coffee watching the oak tree drop its last leaves when Dara came out with a second cup and set it on the railing beside him. They stood for a moment in the comfortable silence of two people who have, without quite meaning to, become something important to each other's ordinary life. Maisie asked me this morning, Dara said, if the big house was our house too. Nathaniel was quiet for a moment. What did you tell her? He asked. Dara looked at the yard, the oak tree, and the pale November sky. I told her we'd see, she said. Nathaniel nodded slowly. And he smiled. Not the polished smile he wore in boardrooms and at galas, but the other one. Quiet one. The real one. "That's a good answer," he said. And the oak tree stood there in the yard the way it had stood for 100 years, through 100 different seasons, unbothered and enduring and full of something that looked very much, in the pale morning light, like peace. Here is what I want to leave you with today. Dignity is not a reward for the deserving. It is not something you earn by having the right last name, the right income, the right address. It is something that every single human being, including a 3-year-old girl holding a mop bigger than herself, arrives into this world already carrying. The moment we decide that some people are worth seeing and others are not, we lose something in ourselves that is very hard to get back. But the other side of that is also true. Because Nathaniel could have looked away. He could have made excuses. He could have chosen his comfort over the truth. He didn't. And that choice, that one quiet, costly right choice, is what changed everything. You don't need billions to make that choice. You just need to be willing to see people. Really see them. All of them. Regardless. If this story moved you even a little, if there was one moment where you felt something shift in your chest, please hit that like button right now. It truly helps this channel reach more people who need to hear these kinds of stories. And if you are new here and you stuck around until the very end, welcome to this community. Hit subscribe and turn on that notification bell, because we tell stories like this every single week and you don't want to miss the next one. Drop a comment and tell me, which moment hit you the hardest? Was it Maisie on the floor? Nathaniel's 6 words? Or the grandmother at the kitchen table? And if you know someone who needs to be reminded today that they matter, that they are seen, please share this story with them right now. Sometimes people need to hear it from somewhere unexpected. Thank you for being here. Truly. Until next time, take care of each other.